right. Hey everybody, this is James Lindsay and you are listening to New Discourses Bullets, where I give a short bullet point like summary of a single topic from woke that we need to understand so we can defeat it. And today the topic is Agitprop. Agitprop is a fun word. It is a combination of two words, agitation and propaganda. Lenin was a gigantic fan of Agitprop. In fact, throughout most of his writing, he talked about the need to send the agitprop, he didn't actually say agitprop that often, or at all maybe, the agitation and propaganda. We have to send the agitation and propaganda out into the society. We have to send the agitation and propaganda not just out into society, but he said specifically into every class in society. And it has to go out into every single class so that you can agitate and propagandize every single class so that you can use them in their own unique ways, whether they're bourgeois or proletarian or whatever they happen to be. You can use them in their own unique ways to advance the revolution. So you want certain reactions in every single class of society, and you send out what he called agitation and propaganda into every aspect of society in order to achieve that. Now, you can take those two words and stick them together, as has been done, and what you get is this kind of combination term called agitprop. Just to be clear, sometimes I hear this word misused. There's no such thing as an agitprop, as in a person who is doing agitation and propaganda or agitating propaganda. A person is not an agitprop. I get it. The word prop makes you feel like it's a prop on a place, like on a stage, on a set, but that's not what it is. Prop is short for propaganda. Agit is short for agitation. So it is agitation and propaganda. Now, the key thing to realize is that means that Lenin and these other propagandists do not see agitation and propaganda as the same thing. And I did a longer podcast about this. In fact, a very long podcast about this on the New Discourses podcast platform. I encourage you to go listen to it if you have time. But agitation and propaganda are deemed to be different. Now, for the generic everyday use of the word propaganda, both would fall under the classification of propaganda. Not that everybody loves him, but Jacques Ellul, a French analyst writing in the 1970s, talked about two distinct kinds of propaganda, one being agitating propaganda and one being kind of misinforming propaganda. And that is really the line that's being drawn. So agitation is one sort of propaganda, and its goal is to engage the emotions. Its goal is to engage the emotions to achieve more or less one of two results. So one or the other of two results. That is, it's meant to engage the emotions to stimulate people to action, or it's meant to engage the emotions to hinder them from taking action that they should take. So on the one hand, you have agitation, which is emotionally engaging. It's usually short in form, and the goal is to stimulate people into action or to push them into a kind of despairing place where they'll feel helpless and enter into inaction when they should be doing something. And on the other hand, you have propaganda. So unlike agitation, propaganda's objective is not, in this dichotomy between them, propaganda's objective is not to necessarily to stimulate the emotions and work people up. Propaganda's objective is to misinform. It is miseducation. It is to give people the wrong perception of what's going on in the circumstances of the world that they live in. So propaganda is like false storytelling, and agitation is like rousing the emotions, again, to drive people toward action or inaction. You can get people to get active by scaring the crap out of them, by making them very angry, engaging emotions like that, fear, rage, wrath, anger, envy maybe. And you can get people to be pushed into inaction by engaging emotions like despair, helplessness. The feeling that what's happening is actually inevitable is one of the best examples of an agitating form of propagandizing people. that's pushing them into inaction. For example, everybody knows politics in Canada, at least at the time of this recording, are pretty tumultuous. And what I keep hearing all over social media, from what I assume are mostly bots, but they're also coming from demoralized people, is Canada's already lost. It's already gone. It's too late. It's too late to do anything. I heard that crap about the United States before the 2024 election, and that all got thrown on its face. You'd hear things like, voting doesn't work, the Constitution is a dead document, they've already won. This is all agitation in the vein of trying to get people to take less action rather than more. But the key difference is one engages the emotions, that's agitation, and one engages the mind to tell people the wrong story of what's going on. Usually propaganda is longer in form, it's more detailed in content. So you have agitation and you have propaganda. You can think of lots of examples very easily. The point of me recording podcasts about Agitprop is that you're swimming in it. If you're on social media, or if you're watching the news, or if you're reading magazines, or if you are engaging with really information content pretty much at all right now, you are swimming in Agitprop. And I want people to be more aware that they are being agitated in particular, because that's what's going to rouse them to action or stifle them into inaction. And I want them to be aware also that there's a difference between miseducating or misinforming propaganda and agitation. Now, a lot of times we think of propaganda and we think famously of the big lie, right? The big lie. The big lie is a lie so big that nobody would tell it. So obviously people will believe. They wouldn't say something that ridiculous unless it was true. And we know that the big lie was something that was promulgated by the Nazis and by Goebbels, who was their propaganda minister. And so you think a lot of times of propaganda being built on lies. And that is true, but the best propaganda is not built on lies, or not specifically. It is built on dishonesty sometimes. Sometimes it's purely honest. You can show, for example, here's a great example of agitation we all just lived through. Whether you like this or not, as an example, I don't care. The fact of the matter is this was agitation. When we saw clip after clip after clip after clip of drag queens doing things in front of children and in story hour and whatever else, that was agitation. That was a form of propaganda to get people angry, to get people to want to take action. And you could argue, well, that was important and necessary. And I didn't say that propaganda is good or bad. I said you should be aware of what you're looking at. Okay, so propaganda can be a tool for good, it can be a tool for bad, but you should be aware that it's not exactly the same thing as, good faith information exchange. So that's an example of agitating propaganda that sought to get people to take action, particularly action against the incursion of queer theory into our society and in front of our children, which was absolutely necessary, of course. But it's also was possibly being used, or could have been used, to try to stimulate what I called drag Floyd, which was to get certain sectors of the conservative population so angry about the drag queen story hour phenomenon and its continuation that they take rash action. So again, the point of agitation is to rile up the emotions, to stimulate people to action, or to stifle them into inaction. Okay, so that was actually showing true information, real things that were happening. But the fact that every time I opened my social media for like over a year, maybe a year and a half, I saw a drag queen at the top of it in front of children, maybe it paints an unrealistic picture of how much it was happening. Maybe it doesn't, but it has an effect on your emotions. It makes you very frustrated. It makes you very angry to see things like that. And so it definitely falls under the category of agitation, and for good or for ill. So often it is not the big lie. It is in fact telling the truth that allows for propaganda. Goebbels, famously with his big lie narrative, also was famous for saying that to the maximum degree possible, Nazi propaganda should all be based in truth. It should say only true things, because if you put out something false, I guess unless the lie is big enough, if you put out something false, people are likely to see it and they're going to discredit you and your propaganda ministry. And so that's a problem if you're going to continue doing propaganda to mislead people or to agitate people. So a lot of times propaganda is done using what I said on X or Twitter and got made fun of, a series of curated truths. So in other words, you say true things in a way that you organize them to lead people into a false conclusion. Okay, so this actually, I did not know this at the time. I know this now. This actually has a name. There's a very fringe, unused word, but it's called paltering. Like, to palter is to tell truths in such a way as to lead people to an incorrect conclusion. In other words, to intentionally mislead using selective truths. It's not quite the same thing as a lie of omission, where there's something that you are not saying that's true that you should add. It's more like telling a series of true statements that lead people to believe something false. For example, the most common example right now with all of the anti-Jewish propaganda all over social media is to say true things about the involvement of either ethnically or sometimes religiously Jewish people in various progressive causes or woke causes or Marxism, and to allow people to draw the conclusion from just asking questions, allow people to draw the conclusion that Jews are the problem rather than something else. So you'd say, for example, this is one that I've faced for years now, James, you've done a great job of exposing the Frankfurt School and critical theory. What religion were all of the Frankfurt School people? And what they want me to say, of course, is that all of them were Jewish, because I don't think any of them were, except for Walter Benjamin, were actually maybe practicing Jews. And Walter Benjamin was different. He was a mystic, so it's a little different. But what they want me to say is that they're Jewish because at least they're ethnically Jewish, and maybe they grew up religiously Jewish too. I don't know. So that they can draw the conclusion that the Frankfurt School is a Jewish operation that's concordant with Jewish faith. And so that's a form of paltering, because in fact their religion is all communist. These people were all communists or Marxists of one stripe or another. They were exhibiting the tendencies of a different faith. But paltering would get you to look at all of these different examples and say, well, let's just let people draw the conclusion, or even draw the conclusion ourselves. Here's a Jew, there's a Jew, everywhere a Jew, therefore it's a Jewish plot. And the therefore it's a Jewish plot part actually doesn't follow. But when you give people a set of carefully curated true statements, you'll see that you know you're dealing with somebody who's deliberately paltering when they reply with something like, yeah, but you didn't say I was wrong, when you call them out for their propaganda. Because they know that they've given you a bunch of true statements that on their own are true, each individually, but when put together, they are false, or they lead people to believe a false conclusion about the nature of things. So that's one example. I mean, all of the woke theories do this too. They palter by showing lots of examples of racism, and the conclusion is supposed to be that America's a racist country. Same kind of thing. You could do paltering, in more quotidian or everyday ways by, telling us, you tell a story about somebody's involvement in this and their involvement in that and involvement in the other thing. And you're supposed to draw the conclusion that obviously they're nefariously involved or whatever, right? So he talked to that guy, and that guy works for this, and the other guy works for the other thing. Therefore, this guy is an asset of some nefarious plot. Sometimes that might be true, but sometimes it's actually not true and can be used as a smear tactic. And the name for this lying with the truth is paltering. And so paltering is an extremely common form of agitprop, whether it's the agitation side or the propaganda side, and whether that's using pieces of true facts from history to tell a false story that's sometimes called historicism. Now, you could argue that the postmodernist Michel Foucault's entire career was based on this. A lot of the feminists kind of wrote bogus histories. The critical race theorists wrote bogus histories. This is one of the most common ways to do, whether it's emotionally engaging agitation or whether it's misinforming or miseducating propaganda. Now, again, the two go together because they're actually blurry on the edges. One is something agitation, one is it propaganda. It's not always necessarily clear. It doesn't have to be a formal education or miseducation campaign to be propaganda, but to be agitation, it must deliberately target the emotions with the intention of stimulating action or inaction. And so I just want to finish by reminding you that Lenin believed that in order to either have a revolution or maintain control over society, you must constantly, the propagandist must constantly send out agitation and propaganda into every class, every sector, every level, every tier of society. Every special interest group, affinity group, and so on has to be targeted with their own flavor of this agitprop in order to mislead them, which means in our world, in our information war world that we live in, you are being targeted with this because you are in some class or some group, whether it's Christian, whether it's conservative, whether it's liberal, whether it's progressive, it doesn't matter. Where you are being targeted with with agitprop. And so the goal of my communicating this to you is just to get you more familiar with the idea. Hopefully you'll look into it more and take it more seriously. And you'll start to look for examples of agitation, especially in propaganda, on the internet when you are on there to try to minimize its impact on you. The goal of propaganda, the way we usually mean it, is not just to propagate, which is where the word comes from, propagare. It is in fact to provide people information that leads them to believe the wrong things and take the wrong actions. So it's usually, it's not explicitly part of the definition, as I already discussed. It can be good or bad. It means to propagate information. Sometimes it's important to agitate people, but the fact into political action. But the fact of the matter is that when we say the word propaganda, we generally add a connotation to that of hostile intent, the deliberate effort to mislead, the deliberate effort to rouse people into action or stifle them into inaction that has political consequences advantageous to the person doing it. And again, with hostile intent. In other words, we see it as part and parcel of political warfare being waged against its targets. So keep your eyes open, be aware. The more you know, the better. Look the terms up: agitprop, agitation, propaganda. Read a little bit about it and practice spotting it on social media so that it doesn't have the intended effect on you that it might.